started. Welcome, Jewel, and thank you for coming out and attending and doing that video with us. We have a few other people wanted to welcome. If we can get this clicker going. Oh, nope. Those aren't the interns. Hold on, I'm back. Stop. We're starting over. I clicked too far. Welcome, Jewel. Welcome, everyone. And welcome Zappos Insights guests. Our Culture Camp people, I think, are somewhere up there. And welcome Zappos interns. And so Jewel's gonna co-MC this, I think, or part of it. But let's start with financials. First up, unless you guys would rather hear a song or two from Jewel first, and then wait, let's take a vote. Financials or Jewel? Okay. And the results are in. I'll go with Jewel.
That's gonna be really scary. I was actually a little worried if financials was gonna be. I was like, okay, I deserved that. I am very happy to be here, you guys. Hello. Let's see. So you guys know my name's Jewel. That's my real name. I get asked that all the time. It's a family name. It's on my birth certificate. These are my real teeth. Nobody asks me that, but just thought I would start with it. I have no idea what I'm going to sing for you. So I was raised in Alaska, which a lot of you know. Just so you know a little bit about my background, I thought I'd do my life story in 2 minutes, because that's how boring it actually is. It actually does take about an hour and a whole book. But the short version is my family were pioneers. I was raised in Alaska, which is a beautiful, wild country. My mom left when I was 8. My dad had a lot of PTSD from how he was raised. He had a really abusive childhood. And then he went to Vietnam and he got more trauma. And then he became a dad with very little skills. And then when my mom left when I was 8, he turned to drinking to try and calm his anxiety and to medicate the pain that he was in, and it didn't work out well. And he ended up repeating the cycle he was raised by. Better. He wasn't as abusive as his dad was, but I ended up moving out when I was 15 because I thought I would go live on my own rather than live with a man who wasn't kind to me. And I knew that statistically, kids like me should end up repeating the cycle that they're raised by. Statistically, not only do we have a genetic DNA inheritance, but we have an emotional inheritance. And it's invisible to us. The architecture of an emotional language that we learn to speak is taught to us usually in our family units. It is not taught at school. And so our idea of love, of intimacy, of kindness, of how we treat each other, how we resolve conflict, all the things it actually takes to be human, we're not given a real proper education in. And so you're supposed to glean whatever you can from your family group. None of them are perfect. It's like universities. The reason universities are built is so you can get the best ideas, the newest, the latest ideas, because information is always being upgraded. Why aren't we doing that for emotions? What does it take to be human, and why isn't there a human school? And so I decided when I was 15 to see if I could solve for this and look at this idea of nature versus nurture. I received some pretty bad nurture. How could I get to know my real nature? How could I get to know who I was? We had this bunny when I was a kid, and it thought it was a chicken because it was raised by chickens, which was cute. It actually would sit on the nest and hatch eggs for the hens. But it gave me this existential crisis when I moved out at 15, because I was like, what if I'm a bunny that was raised by chickens? And I'll never get to know my bunny nature. And so I was like, if I'm really vigilant, and I'm hyper vigilant, and I try and avoid the pitfalls of the emotional language I was taught, and if I can teach myself and piece together a new emotional language, can I have a different outcome than what my life was set up to do? According to, statistically, I should end up on drugs, in a ditch, on a stripper pole, some combination of those things. I wanted to avoid all of those except the stripper pole. No, I'm kidding. and so I did pretty good. I got myself through school. I graduated. I ended up in San Diego where my mom was sick. I was taking care of her. And a boss propositioned me one day. And when I wouldn't have sex with him, he fired me without my paycheck. And I couldn't pay my rent. We got kicked out of where we were living. My mom went back to Alaska. I was living in my car in San Diego thinking it would only last a couple of months. I'd get a new job. I'd save up for a deposit on a new place. I'd get going. But I had bad kidneys, and I was getting sick all the time. My anxiety levels were skyrocketing. I started having panic attacks when I was 16, and I had no skill set to handle it. Talk about, paying rent at a very young age. I was under a lot of stresses. And so suddenly, living in my car, these things were ramping up. My health was getting worse. I almost died in the parking lot of an emergency room because they wouldn't see me because I didn't have insurance. And it was this, and then the car I was living in got stolen. That sucked, but I wasn't in it, so that was less sucky. Silver linings. So this is how I ended up homeless. There's sort of this misperception that I was living in my car for my music. That was not the case. I was living in my car just strictly to survive, and when my car got stolen, I got introduced to what the poverty cycle actually is and what being dehumanized is. Being an animal means that you're just surviving. You're worrying about food, shelter, safety, period. Nothing else. You don't have time or resources to do anything else. You're really stripped of the gift of what it is to be human. And as we enter this new age of artificial intelligence, where they're going to outthink us, they're going to be able to do things intellectually, not intellectually, but through programming, whatever you call that, where they're going to outthink us, they're going to outmaneuver us. What is it that being a human is? What is special about being human? And so I started to ask myself those things while I was homeless because I needed to, because I was an animal, and I needed to figure out how to get back to being a human. And I was stealing a lot. I was agoraphobic, which is an intense fear of leaving your home, which when you don't have a home is very intensified. And one day I was stealing this dress. I stole a fair amount back in those days. It started with carrots, which apparently are the gateway vegetable. Because pretty soon it led to the hard stuff, like medjool dates. I was a very healthy homeless kid, and it was mostly food. Until one day it looked like it would escalate when there was a dress in a window, and I coveted it. It was clean, and it was girly, and it was new, and just everything I felt like I wasn't. And I decided that I would go in there and I would take care of myself by stealing a dress. And I caught my reflection in the mirror, and I couldn't deny what I looked like. I looked like a homeless kid stealing, and I was a statistic. I was really disappointed. In 3 short years, I went from being a very independent, very capable young woman at 15 paying rent. I worked jobs since I was very young, traveled all over the country, hitchhiked through Mexico. And in 3 short years, my life came to a grinding halt, and I quit believing that I could earn $40 or earn enough money to buy an apple. That's how much of a standstill my life came to. And I remembered this quote that Buddha had said, that happiness doesn't depend on who you are or what you have, it depends on what you think. And I had this great pleasure of being stripped of every single thing that might distract me from that single proposition. What is the quality of my thought? I began to read a lot of books on physics. I always was fascinated by physics. And when I learned about particle non-locality, that a single particle can be in 2 places at one time, and that where that particle went was often dependent on what the observer expected it to do, that gave me really a lot of hope as a homeless kid, because it felt like, wow, something about the fabric of this world is listening to us. And as we pursued finding the Higgs boson and all that stuff that eventually came to pass, and now they think there's, 4 more, but I digress into my physics geeky, I apologize. I began to turn my life around one thought at a time. And I began to go, what is it to be human? What do I need to be human? And the model that I came up with is that happiness is a side effect of right choices. It's a side effect of having tone in every limb of your life. And so a lot of us are raised in our households to maybe have the ability to have an education in one limb of our life. Let's pretend it's our career limb. For me, it was singing. I was raised singing. I have a musical family. So my singing limb was really buff. By the time I was 18, I had a pretty impressive fitness on my singing limb. And if that's the only thing you saw, you'd think I was a pretty together with it kid. But my ability to have emotional intimacy was horribly atrophied. My physical wellness was horribly atrophied. All sorts of other limbs. And I realized for me to be happy, I actually had to create tone in every limb of my life. Because just like with a physical body, if all you had was one strong right arm, you'd be in a lot of physical pain because the rest of you would be so atrophied. our emotional bodies are like that. If we only have tone in our CEO arm, or only have tone in, I'm a mom too, I have a almost 6-year-old. So let's say all my identity went into me being a mom. What about the rest of me? It can't atrophy, and I can't expect happiness to be the side effect if I only have one strong limb. Or now that I am a mom, both my parents were pretty dysfunctional when I was young, so how do I get fitness in that limb that's worthwhile? And so I came up with my, what I call, whole human strategy, and I began writing songs. I got discovered, and what I was writing about were these things that I was dealing with, thinking about, talking about. I was able to cultivate a fan base that really supported me and believed in that same proposition. Music, it was never about music. It was about a value proposition of, I am a work in progress. I'm trying to find inspiration and education, and then find the equipment to have tone in every area of my life. So when I got signed to a record label, I almost didn't sign it, which is strange for somebody to say as a homeless person. I was signed $1 million. I was almost given $1 million signing bonus. I was offered one, and I turned it down because I realized it was a loan. And my number one job was to be a whole person, not to be famous and not to be rich. And so I had to make good on that. And that meant I had to make plans for how do I protect my humanity in a situation that's possibly very dehumanizing, fame. And so I set about making a very simple folk record, talking about my own philosophies and what I was reading in books. And amazingly, I ended up having a successful career. But again, I never thought it was about the music, and that's why I took years between records, that's why I changed genres, that's why I really pushed myself. And now, as I look at the world, and where the world is, and that technology is here to stay, it's not going anywhere, it has created, this, there is no distance. We're closer to one another, we're singing into each other's lives, but we're still not receiving a meaningful education about what it is to be actually human. And that's a disservice. It's a shame. We're being taught math and English, which I'm not against math and English. They've benefited me greatly. Okay, the English part. I should have learned more math. That's a whole other chapter in the book that's pretty sad. But what do we do to get a human education? And so as I look now as a mom, that I don't want to just tour and make a living. I want to be able to talk to people about the things that I've learned, the experts that I've found, how I've gained tone in every limb of my life, and to be able to start having a deeper dialogue with people beyond just my fan base. And I met Tony on Necker Island and heard what he was talking about with self-organization, physics, a lot of the stuff that really excites me. And I really believe there's a vacuum being created in his society, and we have the opportunity to fill that vacuum in a meaningful way. I want to play one song for you. I think I have time here. Unless there's any requests, I was going to try one song, but if you guys have any, it has to be something I wrote, though, because I don't know anything else particularly. I thought I'd sing you the song I wrote when I was homeless, when I realized that, I came up with this exercise. I was trying to figure out, okay, if happiness depends on what you think, what do I think? And I was having too much anxiety to calm down. A new study just came out actually saying that anxiety and depression are at all-time highs in historical history. Historical history, yeah, redundant. I do write me good, lots. I barely graduated, so we're lucky I'm just upright. I couldn't perceive my thoughts in real time, and so I had to learn to calm my anxiety. I had to learn how to intervene with my panic attacks, develop tools and strategies. And so I turned to writing, and I thought, if I can't see what I'm thinking, or even notice what I'm thinking, witness it in real time, I can watch what my hands are doing. And so I started to follow my hands around and journal, and write how many times they stole, because that didn't stop right away. How many times they would open doors, how many times they would shut them, how many times I wouldn't shake somebody's hand, how many times I actually did shake somebody's hand. My takeaway, if you want to see what you're thinking, watch what your hands are doing, because it is your thought slowed down into action. The takeaway was I quit believing in myself. At some point I started believing a lie that I wasn't capable, and I believed that lie so thoroughly that I stopped trying. I beat myself in my head. But the other thing that was really unexpected is my anxiety calmed down as I did this little, what they would call now a mindfulness exercise of just watching my hands. It forced me to be present. And I learned that fear is this thief, and it takes the past and it projects it into the future. Our brains are these amazing biological computers that are built to do exactly that. the best indicator of the recent future is the recent past. And so it's constantly projecting your past into the future and robbing you of the only opportunity you have to actually create change. So to me, what mindfulness is, this word is maybe a word you guys have heard. In the 90s, nobody was talking about it. Mindfulness to me is the ability to perceive a thought and create a gap before you act on a thought. And the bigger that gap is, the more you have time to bring your values to bear and new education to bear so you can have a different action than a knee-jerk neurological reaction. That's how I turned my life around, was creating a gap between perceiving a thought and acting on a thought. And that's how I was able to turn my entire life around. I just launched a website where Dr. Judson Brewer, a neurological amazing expert, explained why a lot of these exercises I built even work, which was pretty remarkable for me to see. But this song was really about my first mindfulness exercise, about watching my hands, about the fact that if you can actually show up in the moment, you have the opportunity to create change, and you're no longer a victim of your circumstance. You actually get to be the driver. So I often use a metaphor of a car, but let's pretend our body is a car. Your brain is not the driver. It's a steering wheel. Descartes said, "I think, therefore I am." If I could reframe that a little bit, I would just say, I perceive what I think, therefore I am. So if I could perceive I was sad, I was something other than sad. I was the observer of sad. That's a more exciting proposition. If I could perceive I was anxious, I was something other than anxious. I was the observer of anxious. That's very interesting. Your observer is the driver. And when you have an atrophied relationship with your driver, you feel empty inside. Your anxiety heightens. You can't figure out what your passions are. And anxiety is such a static, like on a radio dial, it's just static. You can't hear your own biofeedback system of when am I comfortable, when am I not comfortable, why am I uncomfortable? And so for me, it was about being able to really tune into that and develop a better relationship and not be a victim. And this is the song that I wrote to sort of give myself a constant reminder of it. It's called Hands. If I could tell the world just one thing, it would be they're all okay. And not to worry, 'cause worry is wasteful and useless in times like these. I won't be made useless. I won't be made idle with despair. I'll gather myself around my faith, for light does the darkness most fear. My hands are small, I know, but they're not yours, they are my own. They're not yours, they are my own. And I am never broken. Poverty stole your golden shoes. I did not steal your laughter. And heartache came to visit me, but I knew it was not ever after. And we will fight, but not out of spite, just 'cause someone must stand up for what's right. 'Cause where there's a man who has no voice, their hours shall go singing. My hands are small, I know, but they're not yours, they are my own. They're not yours, they are my own. I am never broken. 'Cause in the end, only kindness matters. In the end, only kindness matters. So I will get down on my knees. I will pray. I will get down on my knees, and I will pray. 'Cause my hands are small, broken, 'cause we are God's eyes, we are God's hearts, God's hands, we are God's eyes, we are God's hands, we are Thank you. Thanks. Appreciate it.
Thank you. So, give up for Jewel. Jewel and I actually were speaking on a panel at a conference a few weeks ago, the SALT conference here in Vegas, and it was the first time she and I had we didn't really prep for anything, and this guy named Sean, who's on your board, I think, was the moderator asking us questions, and then we were just going back and forth, and it was a really enjoyable experience, and we were saying we should go on the road together, or rather, I was saying that.
I want to get off the road.
Yeah. And so thought, and it was like, I think half an hour or 40 minutes or so, and thought it'd be cool to try experimenting and doing the same thing here. So asked if Sean was available, and unfortunately, as the moderator, he was not. But it turned out that he has a twin brother named Ryan, and so let's welcome Sean's brother, Ryan. I think he's gonna. You want to tell a little bit about yourself, and I think why don't we put you in? Oh, sure.
Sure.
Can I introduce you?
Sure. Well, I'm Sean's twin brother.
Yeah.
Here.
Ryan, check test. Can you guys hear me? Is it on? Okay, good. So Ryan and I met. He runs a youth foundation here in Vegas, where he helps at-risk youth, and he kind of has developed an algorithm to help them understand what it is to be entrepreneurial, give them a psychology for life, and then give them mindfulness tools. And he's just been experimenting with it, and he has a 100% success rate of the kids in his leadership team earning their own scholarships to Princeton, Georgetown, Yale. It's really incredible. These are kids that shouldn't have graduated high school. And I often say, none of us get out of life without pain. We have different backgrounds, but we're all going to have our hearts broken. What do we do with the pieces? That's what makes us extraordinary, and he helps children do that in a really meaningful way. He was an entrepreneur before that, and he realized that he wasn't a happy person and that his billionaire boss wasn't necessarily a happy person either, and he decided he wanted to learn more about how to be happy, and so that's been the journey that he's been on, and he's now the president of my organization. And that's Ryan.
And I'm Sean's twin brother.
Yeah.
Well, part of that story is I think most people in life have someone that came into their life and really inspired them, and I had a great mentor, but he knew how to build companies and make profits, big profits. And at a time in my life that was important, but as I got older, I just saw that as the leader of an organization, you're responsible for families and individuals, and I kind of had a Jerry Maguire moment, like, am I really living a meaningful life? And I walked away and did the foundation because, frankly, it's kind of neat for me to be up here with Tony because back then there wasn't a Tony Hsieh or Zappos type environment. I wanted to have a whole human environment where people could be free. But back then it was, I'm the boss, you do what I say, and this is how you live. And I don't know how anybody's inspired in that kind of environment. So when I've heard about, Jewel's always talking about Tony and his ideas and self-management, and it's just such an extraordinary thing. But today I got to experience it. So I go up to Tony and I say, well, what do we want to talk about? And he's like, just whatever you think is best, just trust yourself. And I hope you guys know how special that is. That someone will actually say, I trust you and your ingenuity and your intuition and for you to be free and to express yourself. and that's actually in a corporate environment. And I find that to be very extraordinary. It's revolutionary. I've never seen anything like it, to be honest. So it's an honor to be up here and to be Sean's fill-in as a moderator.
To be a twin.
But the other night we had this big event where we had a meeting and we were going to meet for 4 hours, and I go over to do the meeting. She's like, I'm really sorry, but I'm getting these amazing texts from Tony. He's sending me these articles. Do you mind if I nerd out with Tony? And we just cancel all that? And I'm like, okay. So I think we have a chance today to see, like, what do they do when they nerd out? What do they talk about? I'm like, can you send me some of those articles? I want to read them too. But first I'd like to know, like, how did you guys meet? Like, how did this whole thing begin?
So I guess we've known each other about a year now, and we were both invited to speak by Virgin on Richard Branson's island, Necker Island, and so when they invited me, I was like, I guess I'll go, and so, and probably the same thing, and yeah, it was a beautiful place, and I was actually doing a PowerPoint presentation about Zappos and downtown revitalization, and during the Q&A part of it, and most of the other, it was a small conference, I think it was only 30 or 40 people, and most of the other folks were CEOs or founders of their own companies that had all done pretty well, and the Q&A actually ended up being more about self-organization, self-management, and as you guys know, trying to explain holacracy in a Q&A format in 20 minutes is fairly challenging, and I was talking about concepts like attention processing and integration and so on, and purpose-based hierarchies, and some people seem to get it, most people, as usual, or it's hard to explain, so we're confused by all the terminology. And there's Jewel in the back, like just kind of nodding, and then she was the one that kept asking these follow-up, like really insightful questions that usually from a presentation, I've never actually experienced with anyone. It's usually maybe 6 months into actually practicing holacracy or self-organization that you start hearing some of the questions, those types of questions from people. And so after the session was over, there was a break, and myself and maybe 4 or 5 other people had follow-up questions, and they were just asking me, and then Jewel kind of wanders in and is observing us and listening to other people's questions. And I'm trying to explain, well, we have this tool called Glass Frog, and it's basically our org chart literally changes every day, and Jewel kind of pipes up and was like, what's an org chart? And which I thought was like the fact she was asking all these questions and had never even heard the term org chart before. And then I think we just started talking, and I don't know, that's my version of it. I don't know what your
I was just so drunk, I don't even remember the day.
Yeah.
No, I'm kidding. No, I do remember the day very well. Hearing Tony talk about a self-organized company, I grew up in nature, and that was my teacher. And so I spent a lot of time observing, and I learned if I observed very, very, very deeply, I could learn an incredible amount. And what I saw in his presentation was a natural living, breathing organism. And again, I think I used a body as a metaphor. But when he described circles, I was like, oh, that's like a kidney, and that's a liver, and that's a spleen. And they all know what to do. The kidneys know what to do. They're a kidney. Like, they're programmed to be a kidney. They know what kidneys need to do. They don't have to be told by the liver what the kidney needs to do. But they're imprinted with the code, which is the values of the company. And so I saw it as this living, breathing, organic organism. And as somebody who's studied nature and also loves physics, I think everything has to be able to follow the natural order, or else it will break down. And what I was hearing him describe was a company as a living, breathing organism that was given life, breathed life through its values and what its purpose was. It wasn't about shoes. And I found that really fascinating, and it made me want to pick his brain more.
Yeah, and I think also, I think you talked a lot about fractals at the time, but fractals in nature, and I think about it in business and so on, and really this, like if you use a rainforest as an example, there's no CEO of the rainforest, but the rainforest is self-organized. And another city fun fact I like to share sometimes is that in all of Manhattan, there's only something like 3 days of food supply, but there's no central food planner. There's different individuals and businesses consuming food, and that creates opportunities for food suppliers, but the system's amazingly resilient. And there can be a natural disaster, a bridge can go out, but Manhattan never runs out of food. And then I think there are just a lot of connections between how you think about resilience on a personal level and a human level, and then having that fractal also apply on an organizational level.
Yeah, it's exciting. We love geeking out over things like entropy, the idea that the universe is constantly breaking things down and having them be rebuilt. And if you use rainforest as an example of that, it's happening all the time. And it rebuilds itself in such a much more ingenious way than prior to when it was broken down. It's constantly regenerating, constantly being resilient. It doesn't know how not to be. And as humans, when did we quit knowing how to be resilient? When did we start thinking pain was something we couldn't overcome and convert into beauty or something more meaningful? Being broken down is part of a life. And so what do we do to rebuild? We're constantly in a state of rebuilding. And the quicker, whoever can get to that part quickest wins. I don't know if winning's the right word, but we move on with less and less discomfort the quicker we can get comfortable with the idea that we're constantly being asked to break ourselves down and rebuild ourselves every single day is an opportunity to do that. And how do we do that as humans? And then how you can build companies that are a reflection of that.
And then what's funny is there's this whole area of research and that with lots of academics and that talks about systems thinking, has nothing to do with humans, but from a systems thinking perspective, their resilience is actually a formalized concept. And what's interesting is most companies actually try to maximize for either efficiency or stability or both. And the research on systems shows that actually between stability and efficiency, anytime you maximize for those, you're actually minimizing for resiliency. And so if you want to increase the resiliency of a system, whether that system is some mathematical model or an actual organization, that you actually need to, in order to increase resiliency, there will be some perceived inefficiencies or some perceived instabilities, or not even perceived, actual instability, and that constant change and tension is actually part of what ultimately ends up making, whether it's an organism or a city or an organization, more resilient. And the reason why, there's another statistic, I think Fortune 500 came out with their initial list in 1955, and 88% of those companies are no longer on the list. So the default future for companies is death under the normal hierarchical structure. And we all know so many examples of companies that were once great, or industries, the music industry, for example, once great, and then making lots of money, being super efficient until they're irrelevant. And so the reason that a lot of companies fall into that efficiency and stability trap is because you can observe efficiency and you can observe stability much more easily than you can observe resiliency. And so it's harder to get appreciate the value till it's too late.
That's true, yeah. Being able to pivot in real time, like with my career, I never had a plan of like, this is where I want to be this amount famous. I never had those types of metrics or goals in mind. I had in mind like, what is right today for me to do? What am I seeing in my atmosphere? What can I respond to help what I'm doing align with what's culturally relevant? And that's what I've always found really fascinating just with our friendship is, as I look at where we're headed in society, where are we at in society? I feel like I did that when I was, at the beginning of my career, my music career. I was like, what do I have to offer that's relevant and authentic to where culture's at right now. For me, it was the 90s. We just came out of the 80s. Grunge was basically a response to the 80s happy, shiny world. And the grunge movement was basically saying, I don't feel happy, I don't feel shiny, I feel horrible, I feel empty inside. And I want to talk about it. And I'm not going to write silly pop songs saying everything's great when I don't feel great. And that's an important part of the evolution of a zeitgeist for a culture, and grunge music gave voice to that unrest. And I was dealing with a lot of that, and then it was sort of, I came to the ... and now what? I feel crappy, ... and now what? How do I fix it? And I happened to intersect in culture at a time when they were looking for solutions. So I don't think there's any true cynical lives. They end up killing themselves. So all of us that are here breathing actually have some hope that there's a way to have a better tomorrow than what we did today. And that's what my career was founded on. And as I look today at where culture's headed, AI is fascinating. I was talking with Steve Wozniak, who I know you know as well. And he was talking to me about AI, and he was talking about an axiom, I can't remember the name of the axiom, but basically where if we program AI to say it can't do harm to humans, we'll be safe. And he said, I actually think it's backwards. I think we have to have an axiom that says we won't hurt AI, and then we're safe. It's a pretty profound thing to hear somebody like Steve Wozniak say. That's how real it is. And then it started me thinking, what is unique about being human? What is it about humans that we can do that computers never will be able to? And it has very little to do with our intellect. And if you think about it, our quality of life has very little to do with our intellect. And in fact, our quality of life is often inhibited by merely our intellect. It's really having that relationship with our observer that gives us, oh, these are what my passions are, this is what my direction is in life, this is how to have satisfaction and fulfillment. And how does that start to apply to a workforce that's going to start to be very displaced by AI? It's fascinating.
Yeah, I think definitely the successful businesses of the future are going to have some AI component to it. Just like 20 years ago, if we were instead talking about the internet instead of AI, it would be, are you an internet company or not? But basically, almost every sizable business now needs to somehow interface with the internet. And so I think the same thing's going to happen with AI. I think from an organizational perspective, historically, Zappos has always been strong in culture and values, and I think that is the main pillar that historically has gotten us to where we are. I think moving forward, it's actually to tie into not only how do you make a human, think of a human being more human, but how do you make an organization more human? And we have an acronym, PEC, that stands for Personal Emotional Connection, and that's what we try to do with every phone call when a customer calls in, and really transfer that human connection and elicit some sort of emotion. It's not an intellectual, rational response we're trying to get from the customer. And then one of the things that Holoxy has enabled us to do is, rather than the standard hierarchy of people, the way it's organized currently is it's a hierarchy of purpose statements, and there's circles and subcircles and so on. So I think that's kind of our next, one of our next big opportunities is really having the idea of having purpose and every employee here fills probably multiple roles, and each role has a purpose statement that's in the context of their circles, greater purpose statement, which is in the context of the parent circle's greater purpose statement, and so on, all the way up to the company's purpose statement. And I hope that over the next, I actually have no idea how long it'll take, that being able for us to have purpose be top of mind in how we make decisions, the same way core values are for us, where our core values are just part of our everyday language, and when something becomes part of language, then it changes your neurology, and then it becomes this self-reinforcing loop, because now you have a reference point in your brain that you can point to. So I'm hoping we do the same thing with purpose statements. We refer to our values, we refer to our purpose statement, and then we have this other concept that we've started talking a little bit about called market-based dynamics, and it's really just this idea of getting away from top-down hierarchical decisions, and like a rainforest or like a city, the mayor of a city doesn't tell its residents what to do or where to live, and it's more about creating the right context and conditions for great creative ideas to happen, for self-organization and self-management to happen. So I kind of think of those as the three pillars of I guess not just Zappos, but potentially for any company. If one of the pillars is about value/culture, one of the pillars is about purpose, and one of the pillars is about whether you call it self-organization or market-based dynamics or something, that concept. And I think those three combined is kind of the next evolution of, I guess, companies in general. And so we're learning a lot, and I feel bad for Ryan, who
I'm just
I feel like
Sean's twin brother. No, but I find it interesting because I get to sit here and listen.
And that's how we met.
Yeah. And now I know why she said, "Can I have 4 hours to nerd out with Tony?" But well, I do have a question in that because this is fascinating to me. Because I know that when you first started all these companies, society didn't think like this, and it probably took a lot of courage and will to actually get boards and public people that are investing to be okay with this, even though it makes the most sense. When was your Jerry Maguire moment? Like, how did this all come to mind? Was it 20 years ago? Was it in your first business? How did this come about?
So back in 1996, I had co-founded another internet company with a college roommate, and we grew that to about 100 or so people and ended up selling the company to Microsoft in 1998. But what a lot of people don't know, and I don't even know if you know this, the real reason we sold the company was because it just wasn't, the company culture had gone completely downhill, and it just wasn't a fun place to work at anymore. And I remember when it was just 5 or 10 of us, we were kind of your typical early stage internet company. We were working around the clock, sleeping under our desks, had no idea what day of the week it was, but it was like super exciting, super fun. And as we started growing, we started hiring friends and friends of friends, and that kept the culture really strong because everyone had some sort of relationship beforehand, and that whole strategy actually worked really well until we got to about 20-ish people, and then we ran into a major problem. And the problem was we basically ran out of friends. And and we were fresh out of college, had no idea how to interview people, learned a lot through trial and error. I think did a decent job in terms of hiring people with the right skill sets, but we just didn't know any better to pay attention to culture, had never thought about what values of the company were or should be. And so by the time we got to 100 people, it wasn't any one hire, it was just kind of death by 1,000 paper cuts. And so when I got involved with Zappos, wanted to make sure didn't make the same mistake again. And so that's why culture was always important from the beginning.
For me, like I see things in such, again, natural metaphors, but when I was studying trees when I was younger, I'd look at the softwood trees. They grew quickly, which looked like fun. Like grew quickly, it was impressive, but then they fell over very quickly. And you saw the hardwood trees, they grew very slowly, and they grew from a really deep, widespread, very stable root system. And a lot of the growth was invisible, and then slowly started to see something above ground. But growth really happens from that root system up. You're fed and nourished and given information. And even if you look at creativity, the headwaters of creativity are curiosity. The death of creativity is hubris and arrogance. And so as I was a young artist, I was like, how can I be a hardwood tree? How can I grow my career slowly in a shape that I think will last a long time, that'll be based on, and so I started my kind of hardwood model, which is based on my root system is my values, and those are what inform me. And it was interesting, I was talking to my 5-year-old the other day, and he was like, well, I grew up to be a good person, and I was like, I don't know, honey. He was like, what? I was like, I don't know. I was like, it's not a guarantee, it's like, you actually, it's a choice you make every day. And he's like, even me? I'm like, yeah, even you, like, and I didn't say it wasn't scary. But he's like, well, how will I grow up into be a good person? And I'm like, well, there's all kinds of adults. You know, what kind of adult do you want to be? You have to give that some thought, because there's powerful adults that are greedy. There's powerful adults that are kind and wise, and they wield power with wisdom. There's unhappy, grumpy, cynical adults. There's very happy, fun, partying adults. There's all kinds. You know, what do you want to be? Giving that some thought. You know, what is your purpose? Why are you here? What do you want to do? And he says, well, how will I grow into a good, wise person? And this isn't the bedtime conversation I thought I'd be having that night. But I was like, how do you not get lost in the forest? And he said, a compass. And I was like, what is your compass in the forest of life? And I said, it's your values. That's how you start to not get lost. And so we started listing his values. And I said, every day, if you can act in accordance and walk each step with your values, you'll end up where you want to go. And he's like, well, but what is my purpose? And I was like, that's a treasure hunt that you're on. I can't actually tell him his purpose. He's his own little individual. And he's like, I get to be on my own treasure hunt for my own purpose? I was like, yeah, you're on a little scavenger hunt. And like, you're going to start listening to your environment. You're going to start seeing what moves you, what inspires you. And that's what you need to listen to more than anything else. And so it's really extraordinary for me to be near somebody and talk to somebody and potentially get to build something with somebody that is thinking in these terms. Because again, when you look at fractals, if you take a drop of the ocean, it's going to have all the information that the entire ocean has in it. They're not separable. They're not two separate things. And so if you have a happy, whole human as an employee, you're going to have a happy, whole organization, and vice versa. You can't have one without the other. And with that video that you guys got to say, it rocked my world. That was an awesome video. It's so true. You know, we really are looking at a society now where we have to look at, I used to call it capitalism with a conscience. If capitalism has no conscience, it gets to run amok. And we're living in a world now where you don't get that margin of error because it's transparent. You get to see into people's hearts, into their motivations, into what's really motivating them. And people want real value. They don't want just a pair of shoes. They want a value offering with that, saying, we actually care. There's an emotional connection here. I see you as a human. What value can I bring beyond this single proposition? How can it be a more holistic proposition? It's really cool to see.
And do the two of you guys want to talk about, I know you've been talking about, I'm lucky enough to be on Jewel's board of directors, and you're talking about doing a collaboration to help people become whole humans. You want to talk a little bit about that and share with them?
Me and Tony were talking about resiliency. How do you create resiliency in companies? What do I think about resiliency just in humans, and how do we help people learn how to transmute pain into beauty, or I assume with company cultures, how do you transmute shifts and respond in real time and not see that as a big tragedy or keep your mouth shut, but actually move toward it, move toward the uncomfortable things, move towards where the shifts are happening. That's where the good stuff is. So I learned as a human emotionally, like if I'm uncomfortable, move toward the uncomfortable feeling. It'll get resolved quicker. It's the best shortcut. It's the only meaningful shortcut that there is. And it allows me then to get to rebuilding quicker.
So, and then I think this is one of the things we ended up talking a little bit on the panel. When you mentioned that, to me, that's the analogous thing for, and you don't know enough about holocaust that we're using, but it's all based on tension processing. It's when you notice a tension, I think for a lot of humans, forget in an organization, just individually, if there's something uncomfortable, then we're, I think, by default, avoidant of that tension. And so that's one of the things that I really liked about your philosophy, is really leaning into the tension rather than avoiding the tension. And that's something where that's part of the reason why I have this mohawk, because we had this circus theme party. My hair was really short, like last August, and then it was red at the time for the party, but then that's obviously faded out. But I actually have not cut the middle at all for almost a year now, and it's been it was definitely uncomfortable in the beginning, and now it's interesting. Just sometimes just the different reactions I get from strangers and children and and their parents that walk the other way, and so. But it's something I try to do in my personal life. Try to do one uncomfortable thing every day, but then within the Zappos context, the goal long-term for the organization is to not view tensions as a bad thing, but just the gap between the way things are today and what's possible in terms of furthering our purpose or making forward progress. And the whole system is based on, if everyone in all the roles process their tensions on an ongoing basis, it's not going to mean that we'll wake up one day and suddenly there's no more tensions, but it's going to necessarily create new tensions, and then the ongoing processing is what's going to ultimately make us better and more resilient and moving forward.
Which to me kind of is entropy, and the idea of, in thermodynamics, they discovered a principle called entropy, which is basically the universe is constantly tearing things down, but it's constantly being rebuilt at the same time. And that applies to everything. It applies to everything. And so when I got comfortable with the idea that there's constantly a force of entropy, tearing me down and asking me to rebuild, it just means I'm in a constant state of creation. It doesn't mean I'm necessarily in a constant state of death. I'm just in a constant state of creation. And the quicker you get comfortable with that, the quicker it's so exciting when you start getting comfortable with that proposition of being, as artists, we often, you write a song, you have nothing, and then you have something. So you get pretty comfortable with the idea that I have a pile of nothing, but something's going to come out of it pretty soon. It terrified the label heads because they worked on quarters and they worked on but what do you mean you don't have a song written yet? We have a single dropping in X time, it'll come, it's just not there yet. What is it to have a constant state of creation where we're constantly creating ourselves, where we're constantly willing to see what needs to be taken away, what no longer suits us, where is being able to respond in real time to your ecosystem, your environment and family around you.
And I can't remember if I sent you the TED Talk or you sent me the TED Talk, but there's, I think it was a 12-minute long TED Talk that talked about this idea of where they noticed that systems that there's a correlation between systems that have more entropy, and entropy is about losing information, and but in those same systems there's also intelligence, and they define intelligence as the ability to maximize your future options, and in general, in any closed system, entropy generally wins, and the only way you can have the intelligence also happen is energy needs to be put into the system. So for us on Earth, we have the sun as an energy source, and for us as an organization, we have our employees and our income, operating income as an energy source. So it's just interesting seeing.
And the willingness to look at, with the record industry, for instance, it was a dinosaur that didn't see the comet coming, and you could see the comet coming for a really long time. But it was a mixture of hubris and just sort of status quo. They thought they were too big to be brought down. And needed to be brought down. It actually was incredibly inefficient. It needed to be redistributed, and it's being redistributed. People don't quite know what the future of that disrupted market is, which is something I find really fun and fascinating. It's fun to be a musician right now. But to get back to the thing that we might be creating together, which I forgot to totally address, we were talking about these ideas, or the idea of resilience. How can you create, resiliency, entrepreneurship, courage, in a corporation or in a company, in a living organization, an organism? You have to actually have each human individual empowered to do that. And something that motivates me to get out of bed versus spend time with my child, what motivates me to leave the house is very different. It takes a lot more to get me to want to leave my house than before I was a mom. And for me, it's this proposition of there's an incredible vacuum getting created, where what it is to understand how to be human, how to be a happy, satisfied human, is going to be really important as we face the future. Not only because I think it's important, we're alive. Who wants to suffer every day? We've got to figure out how to have a purposeful, meaningful life where we can get inspiration, education, and then equipment in every limb. In really busy lives where we have things coming at us every time. So my assistant, Amy, who's one of my dearest friends, she's worked with me for 12 years. She has 2 children, and she has moments where she calls me and she's like, I don't know what to do with my child right now. I locked myself in the bathroom, and it's taking all my energy just to call you and not go out there and scream at her. This has gone beyond her education of how to handle this as a parent. What if you could just FaceTime or Skype somebody that was well curated and be able to get information, education instantly with somebody that you trusted about, here's how to handle this moment. And what if we could do that in every limb? And what if we could change that education model of what is it to inspire, educate, and then equip them? And what if it was so well curated with such a well-trusted curator that you can just trust it? You know, a lot of the homework's been done and a lot of the research has been done where you can go, I can trust this product, I can trust this education, I can trust this leader, and I can now start to go develop tone in whatever limb you want to work on, your parenting limb, your fitness limb, your understanding nutrition in a more meaningful way, understanding physical fitness in a more meaningful way, understanding your work life so that it feels like it has the same value proposition as your home life. How do you make all those things sync up? And it has a lot to do with culture. And how do we interact with our work culture? How do we interact with our customer culture? That's something I've been very passionate about as a musician, is really tinkering with my fan culture. I have the coolest fans. They call themselves the Everyday Angels. They, now, without my input at all, I used to have to be more involved, but I don't even have to do it. They've built this amazing culture where one of my fans recently lost her long-term partner to cancer. And she was devastated, really, really devastated. And the group has learned to talk about their issues in front of each other, really through social media, because they live all over the world. And my fans, without any of my input, developed a calendar, and they all took days off of work. And it was a grieving calendar where they went to grieve with her. And they all flew in and spent however many days of a shift that they could afford taking off from their job. And for an entire month, she was never alone. Somebody cooked for her, sat with her, helped her cry. And they showed up for one another in this really meaningful way. And so what if businesses can, I was reading Jefferson and Adams when they were working on the Declaration of Independence, and Adams had questioned Jefferson. He said, why are you so into small government? You know, what is it with you? And he said, well, bureaucracies don't know how to love. They can't fix social problems. Only humans can, because only humans have a heart. And that just seems so apropos with the talk that you started today's meeting with. That really is one of our strongest values. And especially as we move forward, we're not doing a great job at helping people understand how to lead with their heart, how to lead with their intuition, how to transmute pain, how to respond in real time to their environment, and come up with these ingenious, intuitive solutions that actually doesn't have a ton to do with our intellect. We're not doing a great job at it now. It's going to become paramount that we get good at it, because AI, I think, is going to force us into that proposition. I think it's needed anyway without that. So we're working on a little circle that is going to be tackling that.
So Jewel's, I think, in a circle now. That's pretty cool. And I think you guys understand what that means. So if you were to say the thing that blew your mind, because I'm on her board, so I get all these requests. Can Jewel do this? Can she work with our company? Blah, blah, blah. And I'm sure I know Tony gets a million of those as well. What is it about each of you that makes you say, you know, this is who I think I want to work with? I get to pick, really, I know in your case, one organization I like to align with and really do, you know, put my heart and soul into it. What was it about Tony and Zappos culture, about him or the organization, that really spoke to you or speaks to you?
I think there is this vacuum that's being opened up. We have a real opportunity to do what Jefferson talked about all those years ago, which is solve problems for humanity, because we're the ones with hearts. And if we can inspire business leaders and other entrepreneurs to solve human problems for their employees, I believe that you'll have a more loyal, more productive, more resilient, more courageous employee. And at the same time, you're solving some social problems by giving them a value offering of helping them how to understand parenting better when they go home, helping them understand what to feed their family when they go home, how to address their other limbs, give them education beyond what affects you in your job. And if you can do that with the culture, with the company, with the consumer that you're interacting with, that starts to make human heart, you know, your heart scalable. That's exciting to me. And you don't meet a lot of people that think about corporations in an organic way, about how can I create a living, breathing thing that starts to respond to its environment in real time. That's an exciting proposition. That's very, very stimulating and exciting. And it's true, because anything that isn't built on that principle will be broken down and it will be irrelevant. I call it the dead tree in the forest. You see these beautiful, huge trees, but they're dead on the inside, but they're still standing. A lot of companies are like that. They're dead on the inside. They just don't know it yet. how can you constantly regenerate from the inside, from the root system up as a human and then as an organization? And if you can get both going at the same time, I want to see that. I want to see that exist in the world. And so that's why I wanted to put what I'm hoping for the world into this type of partnership, because you meet very few business leaders that are excited by that type of concept, much less understand that there really is a lot of economic gain in conscious capitalism, and how cutting edge can we be? Because right now, the way I perceive a lot of large companies' campuses is it's a more elegant trap. It's in the guise of perks. We'll do everything for you so you never leave work, but we're not going to teach you how to be less anxious, and we're not going to help you be happier humans. To me, what I hear Tony saying he wants to solve for exactly that. That's what I want to solve for, and I'm excited to see where it takes us.
Yeah, and I think for me, Jewel lived in Alaska for a long time and was amongst nature a lot, and I think just for me, I think all the answers are already in nature somewhere. We just need to figure out where it is and how to apply it to whether it's organizations or AI is based on how the brain works, and and I think there's just so many things where the answers are right there in front of us, and Jewel's in nature a lot more, and thinks about fractals in nature and so on, and so I think that's what initially drew me to her.
And if you don't mind, we were in the trailer park, which was epic, and you were telling us the story when you first met her, and you were up on stage, and she's asking the questions, and you were talking about what was going on in your mind. Would you mind sharing that, if you remember? She was asking, you were in Necker, you were talking, she was asking questions, and you were telling us what was going on in your mind that you didn't say out loud. You remember that?
Oh, what? Yeah.
Maybe not.
No,
maybe not.
okay, fine. I think I wanted to answer the question with "I love you," but it was, and I was like, no, that's not something to say in front of 30 people. So apparently, it's okay in front of 1,500 people.
Strictly platonic.
It was nice for me to be able to, because you have a conversation. I never went to college. It was neat to meet a business leader that actually is thinking about these things, because so many leaders are short-sighted, and I don't mean that as a critique. It's just what we're educated to do, and they're not thinking about these long-term, very far-reaching concepts of what is real sustainability. And we're not talking about just being green. What's actually sustainable? What's a model that will take us into the future for a long time? It's never about the thing. Like for me, it's never been about music. Talking to Tony, it's not about shoes. It's about the whole ethos and the spirit that happens to be selling shoes, but we'll get into other things because it's about the ethos and the spirit. That's the sun. That's the energy that will fuel other upstarts and other trees to grow in the forest of what eventually will be a very large ecosystem.
Yeah, and there's a quote supposedly attributed to Charles Darwin, and it's something like, it's not the strongest or fastest or most intelligent of species that survives, it's the one that's most adaptable to change. And I think that the same thing is true for a human individually, and the same thing is true for an organization.
Well, I like to close by saying, I think about 20 years ago, if there were people that ran the organizations like these two, I would probably have stayed in that world. And it's pretty amazing that both of these people could probably do whatever they want. I think they have the resources and the ability to choose anything that they want to spend their time on. But instead, they're spending their time on how can we help people be happier and be more whole humans. And to be able to work for a company like that is a pretty extraordinary thing. It's been an honor for me to be here today, so thank you very much. And let's hear it for our speakers.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. So I'm going to give you a hand. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you. I think you're supposed to... Bye. Jewel and Ryan.